5 serial killer doctors. Every medical professional swears an oath to provide care for the sick, but sometimes it's the doctors themselves that cause disease and even death. The cases on this list show that while these people should have been caring for patients, instead they chose to kill them. These are 5 serial killer doctors. Number 5. Maxim Petrov. Dubbed as Dr. Death, Maxim Petrov worked as an emergency doctor in St. Petersburg, Russia. In 1997, he began a string of robberies under the pretense of a doctor's home visit. He would visit a patient's home in the morning when relatives would be at work. He would take their blood pressure and then suggest they be given an injection to help them. What the patients didn't know was that inside the injection was anesthesia. This would render them unconscious, leaving behind Petrov to do his looting. He would take rings and earrings from the victims as well as other valuables. Many of his earlier patients would wake up to find their homes ransacked and Petrov nowhere in sight. But after committing 30 robberies this way, he soon changed his tactics. Because on February 2nd, 1999, while committing a robbery, the daughter of the patient returned home and caught him in the act of stealing. He killed her by stabbing her with a screwdriver and later strangled the unconscious patient with a stocking. After this incident, Petrov decided it would be better to kill to cover his tracks. Since then, instead of anesthesia, he injected patients with a mix of lethal drugs, killing them. After he robbed the victim, he would then burn the home down to get rid of any evidence. It took a year before police realized how the victims were being chosen. They discovered all of them belonged to a list of lung patients who submitted themselves to fluorography, which was done and compiled by a local health center. Using the list, the police took 72 possible victims and placed them under surveillance by launching an operation called MedBrat, or Male Nurse. It involved over 700 officers, and when Petrov made a move on one of the patients on the list on January 17, 2000, they finally arrested him. Although Petrov admitted to his crimes upon arrest, he later recanted his confession, stating he was placed under intense pressure by police. But many of the stolen items were found in his flat. It's believed Petrov might have killed 19 people during his crime spree, even though he was only tried for 17 and eventually found guilty for 12 murders. He is currently serving life in prison. Number 4. Morris Bolber. In 1930s Depression-era Philadelphia, life wasn't so good. But even in the Great Depression, when people needed kindness the most, there were individuals willing to take advantage of others. Herman and Paul Petrillo were Italian immigrants. Almost as soon as they landed in Philadelphia, they began various criminal schemes. Herman became a counterfeiter, and Paul ran an insurance scam from the back of his tailoring business. In 1931, they hired Morris Bolber, and they set up a matrimonial agency. It was designed to hook up widowed women with men. The target market were Italian immigrants, but the agency had a unique angle. They would also sell life insurance policies. It was Bolber and the Petrillos' job to see to it the newly married men would die from accidental deaths because they knew it would pay out double. The money was then split between them and the wives. Since the first few cases went off without a hitch, the trio began to grow their crime ring. They hired thugs, including women, who posed as potential wives. The group grew to over 24 members, and the crimes went on for several years. They often pretended to be doctors whose love potions would help the men find their lovers, but in reality they were poisons meant to slowly kill them. It's believed during the whole operation they killed between 50 to 100 men, but the exact number is unknown. The victims were mostly killed with arsenic poison. Some men were bludgeoned to death while others were run over by car. The group went on killing until October of 1938. Police began suspecting something was fishy when too many men of similar backgrounds began showing up at the morgue with high levels of arsenic in their systems. This was further proven when another Italian immigrant, Fernando Alfonsi, died. George Myers had contacted Herman Petrillo about getting a loan for his business. Petrillo told Myers he would give him $500 just to kill Fernando Alfonso using a lead pipe, but to make it look like it was an accident. Shocked at the proposition, Myers informed the U.S. Secret Service. The group sent in an undercover agent to pose as a hitman, and he was offered the same deal as Myers, $500 for killing Alfonsi. Even though Alfonsi shortly died of arsenic poison after that, the police were already onto the scheme. The Secret Service began the crackdown, and in the end, they captured 24 members. Most received long sentences. Morris Bulber received a life sentence, while the Petrillos were sentenced to death and executed using the electric chair in 1941. Number 3. John Adams. John Adams is a general practitioner known for standing trial for over 163 possible murders while he served as a doctor in the elegant town of Sussex, a seaside town in Eastbourne, England. Adams was born in Randalstown, Ireland. Growing up in school, he was considered a plotter and lone wolf because of his tendency to keep to himself. In 1921, Arthur Short, a surgeon, hired Adams to be an assistant houseman at the British Royal Infirmary. Although he spent a year there, he didn't succeed. Short told Adams to apply for a job as general practitioner at a Christian infirmary at Sussex, which he took up. Adams was never known as an outstanding doctor, but he was recognized for being compassionate and considerate, especially to his elderly patients. But many believe that this facade was just part of his MO. Adams would give elderly patients strong drugs to counteract or relieve their painful illness. It was also noted he had an unhealthy interest in the patient's will. One victim, Edith Morell, was partially paralyzed after suffering a stroke. Adams gave her a cocktail of drugs, including morphine and heroin, to ease her discomfort. While under his care, Mrs. Morell made changes to her will, adding Adams in some of them. In one instance, it was noted Adams received furniture and money, but 3 months prior to her death in November of 1949, Morell removed Adams completely from her will and stated he was to receive nothing. But despite this clause, Adams managed to get money, fine cutlery, and a Rolls Royce from Mrs. Morell's estate. Another alleged victim is Gertrude Hullett. She was sick and later fell into a coma. Even though she wasn't dead, Adams sent her off for an autopsy. When pathologist Francis Camps realized Hullett wasn't dead, he accused Adams of extreme incompetence. Then in July of 1956, soon after this incident, Hullett did die and Adams recorded the cause to be a brain hemorrhage. But an official investigation concluded it was suicide. Camps argues it wasn't a suicide at all, but that she had been poisoned using sleeping pills. Similar to Morell's case, Hullett left behind valuable items to Dr. Adams, including another Rolls Royce. These women were among the cases that helped propel Adams' devious medical tactics into a full-blown police investigation. Since the mid-30s, gossip about his Angel of Death or Angel of Mercy status was thrown around. In total, over 132 patients included Adams in their will. After Hullett's death, an investigation began into Adams' suspicious dealings, and in March of 1957, a trial saw Adams defend himself. Apparently, Mrs. Morell had a team of 4 nurses attending to her care 24 hours a day. These nurses said it was Adams' practice to inject drugs into his patient to relieve their pain and suffering. But Adams' defense team demolished the nurses' testimonies when they produced a notebook where a recording of Mrs. Morell's injections was detailed. It included when and what type of drug was injected. It wasn't just one notebook either, but 8 in total, and they were written by the nurses themselves. By April 15, 1957, the jury only deliberated for 45 minutes before pronouncing Adams to be not guilty of the accusations. Despite this, the police still believed he was guilty of the crime. Adams remained in Eastbourne despite his tarnished reputation, where he died in 1961 at the age of 84. Until his death, he kept receiving money from the many wills and legacies left behind by his patients. Number 2. Dr. X killings. In December of 1965, 73-year-old Carl Rohrbeck came in for a routine hernia surgery at Riverdale Hospital in Bergen County, New Jersey. But at the last minute, his chief surgeon, Dr. Mario Jaskelvich, canceled the surgery, and Rohrenbeck died soon after. Then more patients started dying within the next few months. This included 4-year-old Nancy Savino and 59-year-old Frank Biggs. One doctor at the hospital, Stanley Harris, who was tasked to handle 5 of the patients, was suspicious. He did some investigating and noticed one doctor was present when all those 5 patients died, and it was Dr. Jaskelvich. He broke into the doctor's locker and inside found 18 near-empty vials of tubocurarine, a powerful muscle relaxant, along with 18 syringes. Tubocurarine is used to help control patients' breathing during surgery, but when used in large doses, it can become fatal. Harris went to the police, but Dr. Jaskelvich denied the allegations he was killing patients. He explained away the vials inside his locker by saying he had been using it to perform experiments on dying dogs. Since there wasn't any hard evidence against him, Dr. Jaskelvich quietly resigned after the investigation. Eventually, the investigation was shelved, and for years, everything was quiet. In those 10 years, Dr. Jaskelvich practiced privately and became a successful surgeon. He even made a name for himself by inventing a new type of surgical stapler. But in 1975, a reporter from the New York Times, Myron Farber, received an anonymous letter detailing over 40 suspicious deaths at the hands of a chief surgeon. Even though the hospital and the chief surgeon wasn't named directly, Farber traced the incidents that happened at Riverdale Hospital. Farber then repeatedly tried to reach Dr. Jaskelvich to confirm his statements in the previous investigation, but this was unsuccessful. In the end, a story about the case was published in the New York Times. It didn't name Dr. Jaskelvich, but instead alluded to him as Dr. X. The story caused a stir and resulted in the Bergen County prosecutor opening an independent investigation. 5 bodies were exhumed to be checked if they contained tubocurarine in their system, and 3 out of the 5 showed up to be positive for the relaxant. Dr. Jaskelvich was then indicted and charged on May 18, 1976, with the death of 5 patients. During the trial, 2 of the murder counts were dismissed because of a lack of evidence. This trial took over 34 weeks, but Dr. Jaskelvich was acquitted of the remaining 3 murder charges. The doctor was free to go and returned to his native Argentina, where he died 6 years later. It was never proven that he indeed killed the patients, although many believe he was ultimately the one responsible for them. Number 1. Michael Swango. Born in Tacoma, Washington, Michael Swango was the middle of 3 boys and considered the smartest. As a family, they moved several times until they reached Quincy, Illinois, where they finally settled down. In high school, he graduated as class valedictorian and went on to study music at Millikin University. He dropped out and joined the Marines before enrolling in Quincy College, hoping to earn a degree in chemistry and biology. After graduating summa cum laude, he then went on to study medicine at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine. Many of the patients he handled there often ended up coding or dying under his watch. He was caught faking checkups in his records and was nearly expelled, but was given a second chance. Even though he did poorly, he still got a dean's letter from SIU. This allowed him to get an internship at Ohio State University Medical Center in 1983. The nurses began to notice how his patients seemed to mysteriously die, and some even caught him injecting some sort of medicine into patients that later died. These were reported to the hospital, but the administrators dismissed it as paranoia. By 1984, he got a job as an emergency medical technician. This time, the staff noticed it wasn't just the patients that got sick. They were too. Whenever Swango prepared food or coffee, whoever consumed it would start getting sick. Police were informed, and Swango was convicted for aggravated battery for poisoning his co-workers when they found arsenic among his possessions, and he ended up serving 5 years in prison. Following this, the head of Ohio State University went back to their records and studied the possibility of Swango being involved in various murders. However, because of a lack of evidence, it was never pursued. Once Swango got out in 1989, he found work as a lab technician, but soon after, his co-workers began experiencing bouts of dizziness, cramps, and muscle weakness. Swango quit that job and legally changed his name. Since he was bent on becoming a doctor again, he falsified his background to prevent them from knowing of his criminal record. He also got married, but it ended short. He lied his way into various institutions, but when his wife, Kristen, committed suicide, her mother took it upon herself to inform various medical institutions about Swango's tactics. By this time, the FBI was also on his trail. In July of 1994, they found him working at Photo Circuits, a wastewater treatment facility. With his obsession for poison and mass killings, the FBI informed Photo Circuits of Swango's true past, and he was immediately fired. However, he vanished before the FBI could serve him his warrant. He then fled to Zimbabwe with falsified recommendations and credentials. Swango was praised initially for his work, but then the patients began mysteriously dying again. He was pinpointed by patients along with nurses. When his cottage was searched, poison and other drugs were found. He then fled to Zambia when evidence of his killings began to surface. In June of '97, he re-entered the United States via Chicago's O'Hare Airport. He was heading to Saudi Arabia to work at a hospital there, but was promptly arrested. Swango was placed in prison after admitting guilt to defrauding the government. He served 3 years, but days before he was released, he was charged with 3 counts of murder, including assault and making false statements. Zimbabwe was also fighting to extradite Swango to serve for 5 counts of murder. He first pleaded not guilty but changed it to guilty because he was afraid he would be extradited to Zimbabwe. He is currently serving life in prison at the Supermax facility at ADX Florence in Colorado. So there were 5 serial killer doctors. The modern Hippocratic Oath states doctors have a duty to do no harm. But these doctors and pseudo-doctors had something else in mind and decided to wreak havoc and use their power to leave death and destruction in their wake. We have new videos coming out every Wednesday and Saturday, so please remember to subscribe to our channel because you won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.